You're somewhere in your late 30s or 40s and you just looked up average retirement savings by age. Maybe a friend mentioned it, maybe you saw a headline. Either way, you looked and what you saw made you feel like you missed a train that left a long time ago. Here's what I want to tell you before anything else. That number you looked up doesn't mean what you think it means. The personal finance world has a habit of treating late starters like a diagnosis. Like the video is just figuring out how bad the damage is. But that framing is wrong, and I want to show you why with actual numbers. Because once you see the real picture, the whole thing looks different. My name's Andy, and I spend an embarrassing amount of time thinking about this stuff. Specifically, what the path actually looks like for people who didn't have a Roth IRA at 22, or parents explaining compounding over dinner. And the honest truth is that most of those people are more recoverable than they believe. Here's how we're going to walk through this. First, I want to show you what the actual landscape looks like, because your sense of how far behind you are is almost definitely distorted. Then we'll get into what the math really says when someone compresses a wealth-building timeline. And finally, I'll walk through the specific moves that matter most when time isn't your biggest asset anymore. The median retirement account balance in the United States, across all working-age adults, sits at roughly $65,000. That's the median, meaning half the country has less than that. When you zoom in on adults specifically in their 40s, around 40% have under $10,000 saved. Not $65,000, $10,000 or less. And roughly a quarter of Americans heading into their 60s have virtually nothing in retirement accounts at all. So the person you're comparing yourself to, the one who supposedly started on time and did everything right, that person is much rarer than the financial internet makes them seem. Most people didn't start early. Most people are behind. You're measuring yourself against a fictional average that doesn't actually exist at scale. That's not meant to make you feel good in a hollow way. It's meant to recalibrate the urgency, because the urgency you're feeling right now, that's actually the most valuable thing you have. People who feel behind move differently. They question spending that other people let slide. They chase raises they'd otherwise leave on the table. They actually open the accounts they've been meaning to open for 2 years. That pressure, if you channel it right, is worth more than almost anything else at this stage. The mistake isn't starting late. The mistake most late starters make is what they do with the feeling of being late. It pulls them toward one of two bad places. Either they freeze entirely, convincing themselves the math doesn't work anymore, so there's no point starting now, or they panic and start swinging for the fences, putting money into things they don't understand, trying to make up a decade in 18 months. Both of those roads lead to the same outcome: less money, more stress, nothing built. The actual move is compression, not gambling, not paralysis, just compression. Let's put a real number to what that looks like. Say you're 40 years old, you've got about $15,000 saved, and you're starting to take this seriously right now. You've got 25 years until 65. If you invest $800 a month and earn a 7% average annual return, which is roughly what a diversified broad stock index fund has historically delivered over long periods, you'd end up around $640,000. That's not a fortune, but combined with Social Security, and for a lot of people, a paid-off home, it's a functional retirement. Now push that monthly contribution to $1,500. Same timeline, same market, same assumptions. You're looking at just over $1,200,000. One decision, nearly double the outcome. That's the lever that matters most when you're working with a compressed window. You can't manufacture extra time, but you can absolutely control how much is going in every month. This is where people get the compound interest story wrong. They hear it described as this magical automatic force, and they assume time is the only variable that matters. But compound growth rewards two things equally: time and the size of what you're putting in. If you're short on one, you compensate with the other. A 40-year-old investing $1,200 a month will often end up with more by 65 than a 30-year-old investing $400 a month, even though the 30-year-old had a full decade head start. The contribution size matters just as much as when you started. That's the reframe. You're not just racing time. You're building something, and the inputs still carry enormous weight. Now, there's a behavioral mistake that shows up constantly with late starters that doesn't get named enough. They do actually start investing. They open the account, they start contributing, they feel good about the decision. And then they invest too conservatively because the stakes finally feel real. They put everything in a stable value fund or a money market account earning 2 or 3%, telling themselves they'll move it somewhere more aggressive when things settle down. But the market never permanently settles, and 2 or 3% over 20 years is barely better than doing nothing. You've done the hard part, opening the account and sending money to it, and then quietly undermined it by parking the money somewhere it can't grow. If you're 40 and you've got 25 years before you need the money, your time horizon is still long. That's not a short-term portfolio. Something weighted 80 to 90% in broad stock index funds still makes sense for most people in that position. A dip isn't a loss unless you sell. If you're staying invested, a dip is just the price of admission for the growth on the other end. The most protective thing you can do isn't to dial the risk down to almost nothing, it's to automate your contributions so you're not making emotional decisions during the worst week of the year. Set the allocation when you're calm and thinking clearly. Set the contributions to pull automatically on payday, and then mostly leave it alone. That combination, automatic contributions and a sensible allocation, does more for late starters than any specific investment pick ever could. Now, where do the dollars actually go, and in what order? The first place every dollar should land is your employer's retirement plan, specifically up to whatever they match. If your company matches 50 cents on the dollar up to 6% of your salary, you need to be putting in at least 6%. That match is a 100% return on those dollars before the market does a single thing. Leaving it uncaptured is one of the most expensive quiet mistakes in personal finance, and it's one of the most common. After the match, the most powerful account for most late starters is a Roth IRA. The income limit to contribute sits around $161,000 for single filers and around $240,000 for married couples filing jointly based on the most recent figures. The contribution limit is $7,000 a year. Roth money grows tax-free and comes out tax-free in retirement. When you're trying to build quickly and you want every dollar working as hard as possible, removing taxes from the growth equation is a genuinely meaningful advantage. Once those are maxed, go back to the workplace retirement account and push contributions higher toward the annual limit of $23,000 if your income allows it. That's the sequence. Match first, Roth next, then back to the employer plan. It's not exciting to explain, but it's the order that costs the least in taxes and captures every available dollar of free money, and on a compressed timeline, leaving either of those on the table is a real loss. Take a practical step with this before the week is out. Pull up whatever you're using to track your finances and find your real savings rate. Not a rough estimate. The actual number, what went into investment accounts last month divided by your take-home pay. If it's under 15%, that's your most urgent number to move. Not next year, this year. The income conversation tends to get less attention than it deserves because budgeting tips are easier to package. But when you're on a compressed timeline, there's a hard floor on how much you can cut. There's no ceiling on what you can earn. The late starters who close the gap fastest aren't usually the ones who optimized every spending category down to the dollar. They're the ones who made a meaningful income jump in a 2 or 3 year window and redirected most of that new income directly to investments before their lifestyle had time to absorb it. That last part is critical. The lifestyle has to stay where it is, at least temporarily, while the new income gets rerouted. That income jump could come from a new role at a different company. It could come from moving into a higher-paying field entirely. It could come from a side income that actually produces something real. Not $40 a month from a hobby, but $500 to $2,000 a month on a consistent basis over time. The source matters less than the discipline to keep it out of lifestyle spending. Here's why the income piece matters so much mathematically. If you add an extra $1,000 a month to your investment contributions for 15 years at 7% annual growth, that extra $1,000 per month compounds to just over $300,000 on its own. $1,000 a month, 15 years, $300,000. That's not a guarantee, it's based on historical averages, and your results will vary, but it illustrates exactly why income growth and protecting that income from lifestyle creep are essentially the same strategy dressed differently. Let me make this concrete with a real example. Take someone at 42, earning $75,000 a year with $25,000 saved. She's got 23 years to 65. In the first version of her story, she invests around 8% of her income, roughly $500 a month, and not much else changes. At 7%, she ends up around $450,000 by retirement. That's a tight outcome. workable with Social Security and other income, but tight. In the second version, she pushes her savings rate to 20% over the next 2 years, somewhere around $1,250 a month, lands a $15,000 income increase by switching companies, and intentionally keeps her lifestyle at version 1 level during the transition window. Same person, same starting point, different decisions. Version 2 ends up around $980,000, essentially double. No miracle investments, no lucky stock picks, no perfect timing, just a higher savings rate, a better paying job, and enough intentionality to keep the raise from being quietly absorbed into a bigger apartment and a nicer car. That gap, roughly $530,000, came entirely from choices made between 42 and 45, not from starting earlier. There's a confidence issue I want to name directly because it quietly derails a lot of people at this stage, and it doesn't get talked about enough. Once you've been behind for a while, it can become part of your self-concept around money. Never been good with this stuff. This is for other people. And that story shows up in small ways that cost you big over time. It's why you don't push back on a low salary offer. It's why the IRA account you've been meaning to open stays on the mental to-do list for another year. It's why you let a market dip scare you into selling when you should have stayed. That identity isn't fixed. It's a story you absorbed somewhere and you can put it down. The people who close a significant savings gap on a compressed timeline aren't a special category of person. They just stopped waiting to feel completely ready before moving. Uncertainty and action can coexist. What can't coexist, not on a compressed timeline, is uncertainty and inaction. Something to actually do this week, not research, not plan, do. If you don't have a Roth IRA open, go open one today. You can start with $100. The account existing and having something in it changes how you think about yourself faster than another hour of looking into it. It makes you a person who invests, not a person who's thinking about starting to invest. That shift is not cosmetic. It changes how you make decisions going forward. One thing that doesn't get said enough about the compressed timeline path: your emergency fund is not optional. It's actually more important when you're investing aggressively on a tighter window, not less. Here's why. If you're putting $1,500 a month into your retirement accounts and you don't have 3 to 6 months of living expenses sitting in cash somewhere, one surprise, a car that needs major repairs, a medical bill, a gap between jobs, forces you to pull money out of your investments. Early withdrawals from retirement accounts come with a 10% penalty plus income taxes. You could lose 30 to 40% of whatever you pull out, depending on your tax bracket. That's not a setback. On a compressed timeline, that can set you back years. The emergency fund isn't the boring part of the plan. It's the wall that keeps the rest of the plan intact. There's another place late starters quietly lose ground that's worth naming before we wrap this up. It's the habit of resetting the plan every time the market moves in a way that feels uncomfortable. You set up a solid allocation, you automate contributions, you feel good about it. Then the market drops 15% in a rough quarter. And instead of staying the course, you move everything to cash until things stabilize. What that move actually does is lock in a real loss and guarantee you miss part of the recovery. Every time you reset the plan, you reset the compounding clock. Getting the snowball rolling is hard. Once it's moving, picking it up and starting over somewhere else is the one move that reliably prevents it from ever getting big enough to matter. The discipline to stay invested through rough patches isn't something most people feel naturally. It's something you build by deciding in advance what you'll do and then not letting yourself revisit the decision when the news is bad. That's why the automation matters so much. It removes the temptation to be clever at exactly the wrong moment. Now here's the thing about that chart you looked up: the average savings by age. The number tells you something true, but not what you assumed. It tells you that the vast majority of people are genuinely not on track for a comfortable retirement. That's not a fringe group of unlucky outliers. That's the statistical norm, which means anyone who's actually moving, contributing consistently, keeping their lifestyle from eating every raise, staying invested through the rough patches, is already doing something that most of the people around them simply aren't doing. You're not a cautionary tale. You're in the minority of people who are taking this seriously enough to even think about it. And thinking about it clearly, with real numbers instead of vague dread, is genuinely the first functional step. Most people never get there. They just feel bad about money in the background and let it sit there unaddressed for another 5 years. You're not doing that. You're here, running the math, asking the right questions. That already puts you in a different category than you think you're in. And here's what the math says about the decision made now versus the same decision made in 5 years. At 40, with 25 years of runway, a $1,000 monthly contribution compounds to around $800,000. Make that same decision at 45 with 20 years left, and it grows to approximately $540,000. Same contribution, same market. A 5-year delay cost you roughly $260,000. That number isn't meant to create panic. It's just what 5 years costs when compounding is involved, and it's the clearest argument for moving now rather than after one more year of thinking about it. One more thing before this lands. Write down a specific retirement number. Not enough to be comfortable. A real dollar figure. 800,000, 1 million, 1,500,000. Whatever feels right for the life you're building toward. Then go to a compound interest calculator and run it yourself. Put in your current balance, a realistic monthly contribution, 7% growth, and see what timeline gets you there. If you don't like the timeline, one of two things changes it: the monthly contribution, the income, or both. That's a solvable math problem. Seeing it framed as a problem with a solution instead of a verdict you've received is usually what finally gets people to actually move. So here's where this lands. Starting at 38 or 42 or even 48 doesn't mean you've lost. It means the strategy is calibrated differently. You rely on savings rate more than time. You make income growth a genuine priority because the math demands it. You protect every income jump from lifestyle absorption before it has a chance. You keep the money invested somewhere it can actually grow instead of hiding it from every dip. And you build a real emergency fund so that one bad month doesn't undo a year of progress. 80% of people around you are carrying a bigger savings gap than you realize, not to make you feel better about someone else's situation, but because it means the path is real and it's less crowded than you think. The door isn't closed. It's just narrower, which means you move with more intention and less second-guessing. And narrower doesn't mean impossible. It means deliberate. It means the moves you make in the next 2 or 3 years carry more weight than they would have if you'd started at 25 with no real stakes and no urgency. There's something clarifying about that if you let it be. You already have the thing that matters most right now. You're thinking about it, and you showed up for the whole conversation. Now it just comes down to whether you do something with it. If this gave you a clearer picture of your actual situation and what to do next, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming.